All right, FCBC family and extended family, thank you all for joining us, brothers in particular, for joining us on tonight for our fatherhood and faith conversation. Today was funny. We had some, I don't want to take the credit for this, George. I'm going to take the credit for you and Mike for being a guest tonight, because then we had ladies hitting up the church today and text and email saying, can women get on too? So I said, yeah, women can get on too. They see me all the time, but I just assume because y'all two on there. But thank you, man. Listen, I am grateful tonight to have two great brothers and friends to be a part of this conversation tonight. And most of all, we are just thankful for everything that you all do and have done and what you all both mean to me as friends. And even in this season, man, we all of us in some way have had conversations about the pandemic, among other issues. But tonight, I really want to talk about fatherhood. Yesterday, of course, was Father's Day. And I preached a sermon yesterday that I actually got a tremendous amount of feedback with, because I try to touch on everyone and the different emotions connected to Father's Day. For some, Father's Day triggers trauma. It triggers bad memories. It triggers ideas of loss, abandonment, absence. And for others, it's a joyous occasion. But at the end of the day, the idea was, how do we celebrate fathers and also show grace to other fathers? There's no perfect fathers out there. We all have had various issues with fathers in our lives, and we are not perfect even as fathers. So I want to do a talk tonight to follow that sermon up yesterday with two people who are FCBC that I really believe would make this a very powerful conversation. First up is my Morehouse brother. I ain't tell you that, Mike. George Peters, better known as George 2.0. My man, look, Renaissance man, the brother I think does it all. He got credits in Drumline, CBS show FBI, Jessica Jones on Netflix, and that Apple movie didn't come out yet. Did it come out?
Oh, it's out.
It's out now. Yeah, Thriller. I didn't check it. I have to check it out now. Called Servant. But more than that, I mean, brother's a DJ. He's DJ, opened up for Janelle Monáe. But a brilliant brother, and I'm glad to have you with us, man, and glad that you could do this. And we know you're FCBC because you've been doing our DJing for our Mother's Day day party, our Father's Day party, and then you were also DJing for the Justice Con I saw the other day, the all-day social justice conference. So that was cool, man. And the main reason you're here tonight is because you are a new dad. New,
a neophyte in the fatherhood fraternity.
Yeah.
Welcome.
And how old is your daughter now?
She's 5 months, man.
Wow.
5 months. Yeah.
That is new.
Yeah.
It is new.
It's an amazing experience, man.
Good, man. And then we have also a no stranger at FCBC. I remember when I first came here, so were you still in New York, or you were traveling back and forth then, back in 2004?
I was in LA when you came, because when I came back, you were the new guy. I was like, what happened here? And then I heard you preach, and I was like this. All right. Okay. I'm all right with this. All right.
Good. Yeah. Well, FCBC family, you all know Michael Ealy, actor extraordinaire. Most of us know, and let me just put a pitch now. His Journey interview I did with him is coming out in August, where I heard the amazing story behind the barbershop gig. But I remember him mostly from Barbershop, Too Fast, Too Furious. One of my favorite movies, Takers, Think Like a Man 2, and The Intruder. One of the writers, I think I told you, Mike, one of the writers from Takers went to elementary school with me, man.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So So listen, at the end of the day, thank you both for taking this time tonight, man. It really means a lot to me to be a part of this conversation and to allow people to kind of eavesdrop on this conversation. I know, George, your daughter's 5.5 months old. Mike, how old are your children?
3 and 7.
3 and 7.
Yeah.
Man, and I'm the old head here. I got 29 and soon to be 26. So
you're not old, you just started young.
Yeah, well, then, yeah, that's the best way to put it.
That's a better way to put it.
But I've been in the game for a minute, but I want to jump right into it. We try to keep this conversation about 75 minutes to 90 minutes, but mainly 75 minutes. But we all have talked in different ways about the issues around fatherhood. But I want to start with kind of a shaping question. And that is, you know, for me, I remember I was sharing with George yesterday that I became a father at 19. And at 19 years old, it was an overwhelming experience. I turned 28 days after my son was born. And immediately, I remember the night my son was born, that particular night, it became a major moment of self-reflection, of introspection. How has fatherhood, you know, George, you're a new father, Mike, you've been a dad 7 years now. How has fatherhood caused you to look at yourself, reflect? What kind of introspection have you done since becoming a father? How has it shifted who you are, how you see yourself? George, go ahead.
Yeah, like you said, you know, it's a new thing for me. It's only been 5.5 months, but I think that when you're going to become a father, you start looking at things differently ahead of time. So I started to kind of do some digging, personally, even leading up to my daughter's birth. One of the things that was most interesting to me was I was curious about how she was going to see me, and not just how she would see me when she was old enough to consciously express her opinions, but how she would see me now. You know, we live in a digital age, and I've even pictures of my dad in Vietnam and hanging with the homies in Philly and that kind of thing. And I developed opinions about who he was when he was my age that, you know, either meet or expand who he was in my face as I was growing up. And so I started really thinking, like, what was she going to think about me? You know, it was a really like self-evaluative moment where I wanted to know, was I showing up in spaces and in ways that were going to make her proud of who I am right now? And that was really like one of the biggest things that shifted. You know, in terms of like, you know, cleaning up, so to speak, you kind of start thinking of like things that you have to position as a father, as a provider, you know, as a husband, to try to make room for this new life, this new being that's going to shift your world dramatically. But the thing I was doing the most is I stepped back and I wanted to see, like, what did I look like? Not just, you know, to my wife and to my family, but like, what was I going to look like to my child? As you mentioned, I'm an entertainer, so I'm used to being in front of audiences and looking for like a certain kind of response. But this was very different. This was completely different. I just, from a pure heart standpoint, a new position, this new human was going to begin to develop opinions about me that were going to be, you know, according to her, factual. It was going to be a pure evaluation, and I wanted to be able to be proud of who I was, not just now, but who she would see that I've been in the journey to becoming her father.
Yeah, yeah. Mike, what about you, man?
Well, when my son was born, there was a mix of emotions, right? So my father passed away 5 months before my son was born. And I think I remember being really kind of shaken by the loss of my father. And at the same time feeling like, okay, well, my son is coming, so I got to be strong for him.
Mm-hmm.
My dad is gone, I got to be strong for my sister. So instantly, I almost felt like, okay, if he's leaving us now, I must be ready. Mm. I must be ready. And to a certain extent, I was, you know, I mean, obviously, you know, it's a lot when it first happened, but I wanted it. And I think that was what was most important. And when I say I wanted it, I wanted to be that father. Like, I wanted to be present. I wanted to spend time. And I can't honestly say that I would have felt that way when I was 24 years old.
Yeah.
You know, I think when I was 24 years old, I was in a very selfish place. And, you know, I kind of needed to be in order to get to where I am now. Yeah. So when I lost my father, I gained a son. Mm-hmm. And that was probably one of the more interesting times in my life because, you know, my rock as a man was gone. And it was really, really traumatic. But I feel like my son coming helped me kind of cope with the mourning and get ready for the new joy. And of course, my son comes out and he's spitting image of my father.
Man.
So it was like, I mean, I was just overwhelmed with emotion. And I remember the first thing I said to my mother when I walked out into the waiting room to tell her that he had been born, I just hugged her and started crying and saying, he looks just like him. He looks just like him. And that was a very, very, emotional time for me. And the irony of it is when I had my daughter, the same thing happened. My mother had passed 13 months before my daughter was born. And when my wife told me she was pregnant, I remember specifically saying, I remember feeling joy that we were having a second, but I also remember, I'm just going to say it because, people do it. I had to question God in that moment because I was just like, why do I have to lose a parent to gain a child? Right? I didn't know it was going to be a girl, but I felt like, why do I have to lose a parent to gain a child? And again, we ended up having a girl and she looks just like my mother. So my path was what it was. My path wasn't what I imagined life to be. And I think between those, because my kids are about 3.5 years apart, but between those two experiences, what I learned was you are on God's plan. You can make plans. You can think life is going to go a certain way. If you haven't learned by now, this is beyond you. This is bigger than you. So handle it. Raise your kids. Be there for them. Be a father. But it didn't go the way I planned. None of it went the way I planned. So it was a wake-up call to kind of recognize that, that's not what life is about. Life is it's not about making plans and watching them come to fruition. It's not. If you really believe in God and you have faith, you got to understand that it's going to go according to His plan for you.
Yeah,
that was an awakening for me.
Absolutely. I think even as you say it, this kind of what you experienced was really what we know to be the cycle of life. Life is about these cycles of death and new birth. And for you personally, in a very kind of existential way, you experienced death, and afterwards it was this birth, almost a reimagining of family relationships, especially as you say, your son like your dad, your daughter like your mom. And so in that moment, there was loss, but there was also kind of this regeneration or regenerating of those feelings. I mean, you said something about plan. I'm gonna tell you right now, I can promise you that my first child was not part of any plan that I had in mind. I remember my sophomore year in college, and my wife, now then girlfriend, she had left Spelman, was at Texas Women's University for that semester, and she was like, "Man, I went to the hospital." I was like, "What's wrong?" She said, "Doctors told me I had a cyst on my ovaries." I was like, "Oh man, that sounds serious." I was like, "Okay," And then about 2 weeks later, we were talking, but then 2 weeks later, she got sick again, went to the hospital. I said, "Well, call me back, let me know what happened." She called back crying. I was like, "Oh God, what's she going sick?" She said, "No, I'm pregnant." I was like, "What?" And I was like, "Oh my God." Like in that moment, I was like flowing, bruh. I was flowing in my sophomore year. Everything was moving, right? And all of a sudden, I found out right before homecoming. Well, that was a rough homecoming that year because I was just sitting around in the days like, I'm about to be a dad. Like, I'm about to be a dad. So I'm going to homecoming. We about to go to this party. I'm about to be a dad. But no, it is that. I think our children force us to confront ourselves, or at least confront the things we're seeking to confront at the time of their birth, right? The things we're seeking to confront are the things that we have to confront, right? Mm-hmm. And for me, my children were a reminder that there were certain things I could, well, my son, at least when I first became father, and both of them, but there were certain things about me that I had to face, and there were certain things about me I couldn't hide from. Mm-hmm. Because I wanted, like you said, George, I wanted to make sure that what my children saw was my authenticity. At 20, 23, I was still evolving. But in that moment, I wanted them to see my authenticity and to show up authentic as best you could in your early 20s, right? I think in early 20s, like you said, you said something like how at 24, you might have been selfish. And I probably was very selfish, but children have a way of erasing that selfishness, because now you have to look at this child and say, listen, yeah, I'm 19, I'm 20, but this child is dependent on me. How has fatherhood would you say, made the two of you a better human being, a better person? George, how has that made you a better person?
It was, I think back on being in the hospital, and again, this is January for me, right? So this is pre-COVID. And it's hard at this point now to think about what that was like, but you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. At the time, this is pre-COVID, but I'm still kind of tense, we're out here. We don't have a great deal of family out here. So I feel very much like I'm stiff arming people. I'm asking who's coming in the room, all that kind of energy. But then I just, spending those nights like up by yourself in the hospital, if your wife is sleeping or whatever's happening, you're kind of walking around the hospital and you're seeing other people in your same situation. And you're seeing people come and go, coming in pregnant, leaving with kids. And it's a crazy thing to say. I mean, it's the most obvious thing in the world, but like we don't think about it. Like we all came in this same way. Like all of the human beings that like came into the world like this same way. And it made me start looking at everyone else. I mean, because you see, like I'm looking at you guys right now. I'm not thinking about you guys as infants. I'm not thinking about you as, being born at a certain point. I'm looking at you for who you are right now. And I think that for me, thinking about the idea that everybody came in the same way at some point, it lifted a veil. It made me start looking at everybody with a similar kind of lens, giving grace across all platforms. I think that was one of the most impactful parts of discovery for me. To that end, in terms of being a better overall human, at the point, like you were saying, PM, I wanted to deal with whatever was happening in my life at the time and be honest about it. And one of the things that I was working on was trying to hear God's voice and trying to make sure that I could hear it amongst all the noise and that I could separate it from other things I was hearing, even if they were my own opinions. Mm-hmm. And at that time, we had recently moved out to LA, hadn't had any plans to do so. And we had gotten pregnant and didn't really have a plan to get pregnant at that time. But what happened was and this is a story I love to tell in front of my wife. But, at that time, God literally said, hey, it's time to get pregnant right now. Mm. And I was like,
say that to me.
He called me.
It was a direct call. And I picked up and I listened and I said, okay. And I put the phone back down. And then he called back and he was like, and tell your wife what I just said. And I was like, what you mean? Tell what I just said. And he said, tell her, because if you don't tell her, you're going to act like you didn't hear me. Mm. And I was like, okay. So we lay in there and I said, Jovian's my wife. I said, hey, Jovi, God said it's time for us to, And she says, okay, yeah, well, we have this coming up and we have this other. I was like, yeah, I also have this coming up and this other thing. But when we get back to LA, we were on the East Coast at the time. Like, we'll start thinking about trying. And I sat back for a second and I was like, that's not what he said. He said now. And she was like, now? And I was like, yeah, he said now. And like, I mean, true story, like as best as I can count it, like that's when it happened. And I think overall, like, like you said, there's this there's a certain like kind of thing that comes with being like a man in your relationship and being a father and the reliance upon self. But in terms of my ability to evaluate myself at that particular moment and be reliant upon external forces, specifically God, I think that changed the way that I not only gave grace to other people, but gave grace to myself, which I think is the best way to interact as a human.
Yeah.
That's a great story.
True story.
That's a great story. Did we lose Pastor Mike?
I think it looks like we might have, but I mean, you know, the floor is yours. Same question.
What I was gonna say was, I wonder if that still works.
Wait, which part?
We said, look, babe, God told me we should start now. So tonight's the night. We got to start now.
Go get a new Ferrari. We need to go.
God said we got to start right now. So let's go. It's not me.
That's crazy. Mike, what do you when you look at yourself and you think about 7 years ago when you became a father and you now look at the evolution of who you are and your maturation, what role do you think being a father did in your own maturation now as a person?
I think I gained a lot more empathy. I feel like I was given some advice shortly after my father passed. I was given some advice from a really great director that I know, who, when I told him we were pregnant, he was very happy for me. And he said, let me give you one piece of advice, which was, when the baby comes, don't worry about being a good father, because the baby doesn't need you in the beginning, especially that first year. The baby needs its mother. And he was like, to survive. So she was like, don't feel like you got to go be the best dad that you got to be. He said, for that first year, focus on being a good husband. Yeah. Because she's going to need you. You know what I mean? She's going to need you more than the baby needs you. So I was like, oh. And, I think sometimes as men, we tend to think, the baby's coming, I'm going to be playing with this child right away. Like, no, like there's some time before you can pick up a kid, throw him across the room onto a couch and roughhouse and stuff like that. You know what I mean? There's time before that happens. And so for me, what was interesting was spending that first year trying to do exactly what he said, which was be a good husband. It actually helped my relationship, because I learned so much more about what my wife had gone through as a child and how that affects her now. Got into couples therapy. Like, all of these things were like very important and have helped us kind of sustain the relationship we have now. So it taught me, having children taught me not only empathy for, I thought it would just, I'd become a better person and look at, the innocence of my children and somehow be able to look at other people and feel like I can have more empathy for them. Well, it started with my wife.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It started with my wife. And then I began to have more empathy for other people, whether, it be people at work, it be somebody whose article I just read about in the Times or something. Like, even when you think that people seem like they have it all together, you just don't know what's really going on. Yeah. And so for me, having kids opened me up to becoming less judgmental and more empathetic, sympathetic, understanding, willing to listen. Because if you don't listen, what you learn, and you'll learn this as well, George, what you learn once your kids start communicating with you is you can learn more about life, and you can learn more about them by listening to them. By actually hearing what they're saying to you. because to a certain extent, their form of communication is by far the most honest form of communication because they have no filter. They haven't been jaded by race. They haven't been educated in, misinformed or miseducated by public school systems. Like they are raw and real. And you can learn so much just by listening to your own children. And I've learned so much more about the way in which we operate as human beings and how we operate as people by watching how my kids operate.
Yeah, you just said something that hit me hard, bro. When you said that you had to be, you realize that your friend's advice is powerful, that you had to be a husband. Because, again, we my wife and I, we got married 2 years after my son was born, and a year and a half after we got married. Well, we got married 2 years after my son was born. A year and a half after we got married, my daughter was born, right? And so part of my immaturity was not understanding that, right? I didn't have, as a man, you feel like, you got to keep things, to yourself. What's at home, I keep it home. I don't talk about it. And we're not always socialized to find brothers to have these conversations. And very rarely do we have these kind of conversations with other brothers about, hey man, how's it been as his father? What are the challenges? So we don't do that. We sit around, act like we all got to figure it out in public, right?
Yeah.
We're on this road in public. But for me, what you just said could have really saved us. We didn't have no money to go to therapy. It could have saved us a whole lot of arguments. And I got to own that, right? Because I didn't understand. I really didn't understand my role was. And as a young father, you equate fatherhood and manhood at the same time. So things that I thought were kind of, in my immaturity, that were kind of affronts to my manhood, I internalized it as affronts to my fatherhood too.
Yes.
Right? Instead of understanding the role that was necessary. It is supporting my wife. It was being there because she becomes a primary life giver, the primary nurturer. Now I will say though, I had an interesting experience, and I'll share this with you all. When my daughter was born, it was a very traumatic delivery. So my wife's bladder was actually torn during the delivery. So she had to and they found that out on a whim, and they had to do emergency surgery to repair her bladder. She was like close, from even not surviving, because she kept saying she was in pain. She was pain. And while I was gone, she like almost lost consciousness. They rushed her down to emergency, ended up doing surgery. I come back. Funny story though. I came back to the hospital. My daughter had just been born the day before. And I get to the room and my wife is not there and the baby's not there. So I'm like, what's going on? I go back to the nurse's station and I was like, Lakeisha Walrond and whatever the room was. They said, oh yeah, the doctor needs to talk to you. I said, wait a minute. What do you mean the doctor needs to talk to me? Now she didn't tell me what was wrong. I would never, the doctor comes up and he says, Mike, he's actually one of my frat brothers. He says, Mike, he said, man, we just had to do emergency surgery on Lakeisha. It was close, man. And she was actually being poisoned from internally because of the bladder had ruptured. And he said, man, this was lucky. Yo, I'm 23. My first reaction was, bro, I said, let me tell you something. I said, no, y'all lucky. If I would have come back to this hospital and y'all told me my wife had passed, bro, I blanked out. I went right back home and got some toast, that it, and I'd have came back. I'd have tore this whole hospital up. Like, but in that moment, my point was this: because she had surgery, when she came home, my wife could not move. She was bedridden for the first 30 days of my daughter's life.
Yeah.
So I then now with a 2.5-year-old, 3-year-old, and an infant, and I'm in school full time, had to now learn how to take care of this infant. She couldn't even breastfeed. My wife had to pump. She couldn't hold her to breastfeed. So it was like all of a sudden the weight of that moment hit me in ways. And it was after that I did become more empathetic. I did realize, hey, I got to show up differently in this space, right? Like, and that's real. I got one more question. We're going to kind of freestyle some questions because I'm actually looking at Facebook and getting questions from it. But both of you, I met you all both through church, right? And spiritually. So when you think about yourself as a father, how has your faith, your spirituality kind of influenced how you see yourself and how you lead as a father? Go ahead, George.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, it's kind of similar to the story I was telling about the pregnancy. I've discovered that I'm far more comfortable in identifying a message that God has given, even if it sounds completely crazy. If I believe that I've heard it, I'm almost more comfortable with that than with devising a plan just completely of my own volition. And I'm a planner in that way. I like to put out charts of what time we're going to leave from this, and we're going to stop here and do that. This is my nature. But I find that, as radical as it sounds, if God says, hey, get pregnant now, move to LA, whatever that thing is, for me, that has been really a new gateway, like a rebirth in how I interact with God. Like, I can actually hear and rely and trust that voice in ways that I couldn't before. And I think in large part of it is, and if I'm just being honest and vulnerable about it, it's not that I don't think that God hasn't always taken care of me, because God always has. I know that to be, a fact. But during the process of conception and birth and delivery, there were so many things that happened that were so far out of man's control, woman's control.
Yeah.
There were so many things that I understood. I mean, we were putting the belly beats and playing, music. We were, eating the right foods. All the things that you're supposed to do to help form a healthy life. But then you get a report from the doctor and it'd be like, hey, congratulations, you don't have, infirmities 1 through 3,000. And I'm like, I didn't even know what they were. I don't know what any of these letters mean. And it made me really aware of the fact that, like, the process that was happening inside of her stomach, in her womb, that life that was being fashioned inside of her womb, neither one of us could put our hands in there and change it. We couldn't do anything about it. And that was just a really just blatant, obvious way of understanding for me that God was absolutely in control. And so now I'm even more willing to submit in that way, because I know he's going to take care of my daughter. Like, I know that for sure, even if I don't have the means or the plan or to put it together, I know that he's going to come up with the way for it to happen. I mean, similarly to what you were saying, PM, and you hear this story with a lot of Black women, in all stages of access to healthcare, things happen during childbirth and conception and all of that, right? I mean, stuff that you wouldn't even imagine, that you didn't know you should be looking out for. Yeah. And the way that those things happen, and I won't enumerate them all right now, but the way that things happen and obstacles and impediments stacked up against us around the time of my daughter's birth, and the way that we would walk into appointments and almost boldly, foolishly sometimes say, oh, don't worry about it, it'll be fine. God said it'll be fine. Really trying to convince ourselves of the truth. And then that thing just going away, whatever that issue was that was going to change everything for us, that just, it just made me feel so confident in that way. And like you said, as a man and as a father, you want to be able to lead with that kind of confidence. It's even better to know that I have that army at my back. Like, that's the thing that pushes me forward and gives me the confidence to make decisions and to be relaxed and to be faith-filled.
Yeah, what you just said is very powerful, because it really says that somehow the process, not just becoming a father, but the process to becoming a father, made you lean into that space of trust in God, because you realize in that moment, and we always have these different moments in different stages of our lives where we say, at the end of the day, I do my part, but there's just some things that I have no control over. It's that relinquishing the ability to control, or desire to control. And when you actually, as you say, literally have no part in what happens in utero, in womb, and you're sitting here waiting, but also there's these feelings of helplessness at times, because, as you know, same thing I did. You think about, well, this is going on. You don't think it negatively at all. You don't even put that energy out, but you realize that it is a moment of great humility, right? Because so much is out of your hands, and so much is up to how God is shaping, how things are shaped. And everybody doesn't have that experience. It is definitely, that journey is definitely a journey where you become humble and you realize a few things, how much you really don't know, and how acknowledging that is necessary for your own mental well-being during the journey itself, right? Especially if you have a tendency to want to have answers. There were times, and our thing is your wife don't feel good. What do you need me to do, babe?
We need solution.
We want a solution. Here, there. What do you need me to do? What I need to get? And sometimes it was nothing. I just need to express to you that right now things are not. I don't feel well. Nothing is wrong. And so I had to learn pull back, and it made me a listener instead of a fixer.
Man, I'll tell you what, like truthfully, I remember thinking about all the things that were going to happen when my daughter was born. And I even asked the foolish question of my wife, thinking that this was like, me being participant in an advanced way. I was like, so wait a minute. Like when you wake up in the middle of the night and you breastfeed, I know I can't breastfeed, but like, what can I do? And she looked at me and she was just like, nothing. You can't do this. And I was like, oh, okay. All right. And like that blew my mind because I wanted to be a part of every single thing that happened. And to your point, Michael, like during this early stage, there's certain things we just can't fix. There's like sometimes the child just wants their mother. And that was another like real big obstacle for me.
Yeah. And what about you, man? How's your faith kind of shape you along this journey?
Yeah, listen, I think you learn to let go and let God. You just do, because there's no, from the moment you get pregnant, you realize, oh, yeah, that wasn't supposed to, okay. That was like the first time you were out of control, right? That was the first time you were out of control. The second time is, as that baby begins to grow inside, again, there are numerous things. First of all, okay, I take it even a step back further. Me and my wife, for example, we knew a lot of people who are struggling to get pregnant. Whether it's environmental or whatever, hormonal, whatever. Right now, we're living in a time where a lot of people are struggling to even get pregnant, which I always thought was ironic because I spent most of my teenage years trying not to get someone pregnant. And then it was like, now that you really want to try and get someone pregnant, it's a problem. It's right. Like ridiculous. But yeah, you start to learn that, like, okay, you go to these doctor visits and, you're involved and you hear that heartbeat and your heart just, your emotions are high and everything. But there's not a day that goes by where you can't help but think, man, please, Lord, don't let nothing go wrong. Just, we on our way. Just, what I mean? And you can't wait to meet your kid and all these other things. And you realize over the course of 9 months that you have no control. Another example, the baby is due on a particular day.
Yes.
You say, okay, I don't know if it's going to come on that day, but let's see what happens. My wife really wanted to have a natural birth. She didn't want to induce. She wanted to, she didn't want to have a cesarean. She wanted to have a natural birth. And she pretty much did. But what she wanted was to try and control the situation and say, look, I want to wait for him to come. And the OB was like, look, I think we should induce. He was due like on the 11th or the 13th or the 11th of April. And it was like, okay, why don't we set that date and I'll just induce because I got to go out of town. Right? That's what he said. He said, I got to go out of town on a trip. And if I just deliver your baby, I can go and then, you'll be good and everything will be fine. And my wife was like, I don't think I want to do that. And I was like, baby, who's going to deliver the baby? I was like, I can't do this. You know what I mean? Like, who's gonna do it? She was like, he has backups and we'll just go with the backup if need be. And so the due date came and she started feeling down because, he wanted to stay in there. Like he was not coming out. And so but you can't stay in there but so long because you overcook and it's a problem. So she set a date to induce. And the night before we were to go in and induce, she wanted a foot massage. I didn't want to give it to her. I hadn't learned my lesson yet. I didn't want to give it to her. And, and she went down the street to some rinky-dink salon or something and they rubbed her feet. She came home talking about, I think we got to go to the hospital. And I was like, what? And sure enough, at 7 in the morning or whatever, he came. And the doctor who was supposed to deliver the baby actually had just flown in town, came straight from the airport and delivered our son.
Oh, wow.
So you realize in those moments that as much as you want to try and control this, you don't. You got to let it be what it is. Yeah. You know, as much as we thought we were going to, not induce, it looked like we were going to induce. And when it felt like we were going to induce, we didn't induce.
Yeah.
And then the miracle of seeing your child come out of, you know what I'm talking about? Like to see that head and then the baby come out. You already like, I mean, there's nothing I could have done to make this work. Like, it's just amazing to see a human being come out of another human being and they're both okay.
Yes.
Like it's a blessing beyond my imagination. It really is the miracle of childbirth. And I was blessed to see it twice. I was blessed to see it twice. And so, it's you can't help but say, I just got to let go and let God. And I feel like as a father, I'm trying to do everything in my power to steer my children in the right direction. But what I learned from my parents is, and I think you and I talked about this that day at Pan's, is you can give them all the best parenting that you can summon. But at the end of the day, they're going to be in some situations where the only thing that's going to save them is judgment.
Yeah. Maybe.
Because all of us have been in those situations where we made the right decision. We didn't know it at the time, but we made the right decision. And look at where we are now. And we think about where we could have been had we not made that right decision. So my thing is, I can't control who you're going to come in contact, what you're going to do, how you're going to do this. But what I can do is try and teach you good judgment and wisdom and share that with you. And I have to let go and let God take care of you, because I can't watch over you every day, all day for the rest of your life. I can't.
Yeah. I'm getting some questions on Facebook. One of the things I did in the sermon, and I want us to try to speak to this as raw. We're going to get into kind of some more meat of this conversation, because I think in some ways, if we sat back on the scorecard, I know for me, and looked at who I was as a father, of course, there were mistakes made. I was young.
Yeah.
There were things I wish I could go back and do differently, but that time has passed. But there are a lot of people, and we talk about our parents, we talk about fathers, and I can even talk about some of the challenges, but there's some, like, for example, one question was, and you all can just respond how you feel, even if it's not necessarily your experience, but you know enough to know. So one person said, how do you begin the process to mend a fractured relationship with your father? If you have that, I can speak to that, but any thoughts on how, because that's a lot of people's story. We don't like to talk about that part. We don't always talk about it. That's why in the sermon, I addressed it head on, that Father's Day for many is a challenging day. And for some, it's a beautiful day, and for some, it's a day where you think about loss, like you said, Mike, your father passing away. But then for others, it is a day that actually is a trigger, right? For some challenging moments. How do we because what happens, again, this is where I started, as brothers, we don't always have these conversations because we're not necessarily socialized to be vulnerable and transparent around other men, right? And so oftentimes it's our girlfriends, our wives, our fiancés who see the crying, who see the wrestling. But as far as how we engage as men, how would you talk to those who are having challenges mending fractured relationships? What words could you think as a son and a father? Right. So go ahead, George.
I gotta get a charger real quick, George.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead, George.
So yeah, I think it's tough. I think one of the most important things to think about, and this is something I'm realizing now that I am a father, is even though I added that title, the things that I was before have not gone away. You know, I am still, I'm definitely still a husband. I'm definitely still a Black man, and I'm definitely still a human being. And all of those things, I have and will continue to make mistakes. And one of the things I think that really was made clear to me as I grew older is thinking about my father, who I had a close relationship with, is that he's a human being too. You know, like I know I met him as a hero, and you know he was the strongest man in the world, and he could fix anything, and he was my first barber, and you know all those kinds of things. But
Yeah.
he's also very much a human being. And if I don't hold him or allow him that space to be a human being, I hold him to a standard that just isn't fair. And so I set him up to fail, really. I remember, and I told you this, PM, I remember somewhere around 13, 14, I got my first little whiskers and, you know, needed to start using deodorant twice a day. I was starting to feel myself a little bit. I thought I was somebody. I could look my dad in the eyes. And he told me, "Oh, you wilding out, man. Like you need to chill." And I just persisted in just being a hardhead in certain areas. And he identified for me that we were on this sort of semicircle trajectory where he was just going to continue doing this, and he was going to wait for me to come around. And some relationships are like that. And sometimes you don't meet back up, whether it's because you lose a parent before that happens, or the trajectory of the path is just different. You know, these are real human things that happen. I think that the most important thing to do in order to try to mend any relationship, or particularly one that is father-child, is to give grace in the same way that your father gave you grace when you were falling, when you were spitting up on their couch, when you were, you know, destroying their shirts or their favorite hat. This is not an example that I have, or maybe it is, but you know, when things were happening to you as a child, your father was giving you grace in the same way that God continues to give us grace when we fall, when we turn our back, when we don't do or heed the warning that he so clearly identifies for us, and we still want to go our own way. I think that when you have a fractured relationship and you identify it, then it becomes incumbent upon you. It is now your responsibility. It's not a role reversal, but it's now your responsibility to give grace back in the other direction. And that would be my first, you know, my first piece of advice for anybody dealing with a fractured fatherhood.
So first start learning grace. I'm gonna come back to that. Go ahead, Mike.
I you know, it's tough because I had a great relationship with my dad, right? So, but what I will say is the thing that I learned from losing a parent and gaining a child twice is that whatever's fractured can be repaired. Mm-hmm. If it's fractured, it can be repaired. And the most precious asset that we have is time. It's not money, you know, wealth, status, awards, all of those things. It's not any of that. The most precious asset we have is time. And if you don't believe me, ask Steve Jobs. With all the money in the world, he couldn't save his life and passed away from pancreatic cancer. So making a bunch of money is great. Donating to charities is great. Being a high profile person, president or whatever, that is great. But time is your most valuable asset. And when you lose someone close to you, it rings true in a way that you just can't, you just can't. My mother was my spiritual rock throughout my life. And I haven't been the same since. And it's been 5 years. I haven't been the same since. So, you know, there's so many times when I wish I could call my parents and talk to them about what I'm doing as a parent, or get advice, or just say, thank you. Thank you. Because, you know, whatever they did helped me get to this point, and I'm learning and I'm understanding things in a different way. And when I see people who are upset with their parents, or I see people who have gone, for whatever reason, astray from their parents, and it doesn't matter whose fault it is.
Right.
From my perspective, again, and this is coming from someone who had a great relationship with his parents, from my perspective, it doesn't matter whose fault it is. There's a relationship that started from birth. They gave birth to you. That's the beginning of a relationship. You have to at least try to mend that fence. Now, if your father or mother is a racist bigot and you can't seem to get through to him, I mean, I'm not saying you have to, I don't know what you do under those circumstances, but if you don't try, and so I think to answer this question, it starts with you start from day one and you try. Whatever it takes to try to mend that fence, you have to try. Because what you don't want is to lose that person, or that person lose you. And then whoever's left here is wondering about all of the time wasted.
Yeah.
The time wasted, I think, will eat at you more. I don't know this personally, but I feel like the time you feel that was wasted will eat at you more than whatever it is that's bothering, or whatever it is that has come between you two. So fix it. Mm-hmm. Fix it.
Yeah. I have that for me, because I've had, there have been moments in my adulthood that I've had tense relationships with my father, periods where we didn't talk, right?
Yeah.
And, that had an impact. And, as one person said in the Facebook comments, there are times where there are some relationships, because it does take two, as the person said, if you have a father who wasn't present, you're trying as a child to make the relationship work, and then they're completely resistant, there's nothing to do. That's where, as you said, George, not just grace for the parent, but grace for yourself too, because if you've done everything you can, right, then at that point, you just have to trust, hey, I got to keep it moving. And because then you can actually engage in this kind of emotional torture, trying to make something work, because you can't make someone want to be around you. You can't make someone want to love you. You can't make someone want to be in your life. And we've all hit those moments, especially in fractured relationships, where you have to say, listen, this is who he is. This is who my dad is. And this is what they are. And in the sermon, I said sometimes, and here's an issue for those of us who've had those challenging relationships with fathers and those who are watching. The issue is sometimes, here's why I had to bring grace in. That father can only give what they have. Yeah. They can only give what they have, and out of what they've experienced. And sometimes we place expectations on people who don't have the experience that would help them give what we desire. Right? So we have unrealistic expectations of someone who has limited experience in being who we would want them to be, in showing up the way we would want them to show up, right? And then that becomes extremely challenging. But as you both hit it, those two words are critical: grace and time, right? Showing grace and understanding the fragility of human life, and the time is precious. And I had to get to that point. There were things that I know my dad missed with my kids, and that bothered me, because I wish we were in a different place. I wish I was mature enough. I wish he could have done things different. We could have done things differently, but it is here now. So it took me a while, and to say, listen, here's where we are now. This is what we got to deal with. And let's make it work the best way we can, right? Watch this. Given our knowledge of both of our personalities and character. Right. Right. Given who we both know we are at this time, how do we make that work? And I think for those who are watching, who are raising these issues around, because there's a lot of people, again, who've had damaged, traumatizing relationships. You about to say something, Mike?
Yeah, what you said is very, very crucial. And here's why. Because, and this is the thing that I miss. Again, when I say I want to talk to my dad, or I want to talk to my mom, it's more so because I'm a parent now. You've been a parent.
Mm-hmm.
You know, whether you were there or not, you are a parent. So that whole idea of not, they gave what they could. It's very, very real. And you're, as a parent, you have to have somebody to help you kind of get through certain moments where, you know, because you will feel, and I'll tell you this right now, you will feel like you have failed. On certain times, you will feel like you have failed as a parent.
Absolutely.
And you are like, how could I have been this guy? I don't understand. And like you said, through time, perseverance, and a willingness to look at yourself and understand who you are, why you are who you are, it all becomes clear. And you can't make up for lost time, but what you can do is make the most of whatever it is you have left. And I feel like that you hit that right on the head in terms of you give the best you can. But as a parent, I can honestly understand now why certain fathers just don't have it.
Yeah.
Or certain mothers just don't have it. And whether they give the child up for adoption or they leave or whatever, there was a time when I would have been very judgmental and critical about it. And I have learned to have empathy because you don't know what they've gone through until you've been in their shoes.
Yeah.
You just don't know until you've been in their shoes. And as a parent who has failed on certain levels, you know, you have to learn to forgive yourself, because that's the only way to get through parenthood is to learn to forgive yourself.
Yeah.
And try and have empathy, not only for others, but for yourself, because you're not going to always get it right. I had an actor who told me one time on a movie, he said, I decided today that I'm never going to raise my voice to my daughter again, because I don't want her to think it's acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
And instantly I was like, oh, I've messed up. I poisoned her mind. She's going to get Ike Turner in her life. I can't take it. This is not, I've ruined her. You know what I mean? She was one.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
I don't even know if I had raised my voice at that point. You know what I mean? I don't even know if I had, but I was like, wow, that's huge. That's huge. And, you know, it's one of those things, again, I talk about it in therapy, and it's one of those things where it's like, you kind of understand you're going to make mistakes, but beautiful parenting is not, it's not about not making mistakes. It's about recognizing those mistakes and going to your child and saying, you know what? I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You didn't deserve that. It wasn't on you. You know what I mean? Like you start, you're going to get to this point, Jerry, where you start like negotiating almost with them, because you have to almost, you want them to have this kind of logic and this kind of understanding that, you know what, that wasn't meant for you. Mm-hmm. That was me dealing with my own stress, and I took it out on you. I took it out on you. My father did that all the time. All the time. He didn't have the tools. He didn't have the tools to say, I'm sorry, I took out my anger from work on you.
Yeah.
So he would do it in other ways. Come watch this movie with me. Let's go get a pizza. You know what I mean? Like he would do it in other ways, but he wasn't a verbose man in that way in which he would say, I'm sorry. You didn't deserve that.
Yeah. I
took my frustration out on you. And that to me is where I am in terms of just trying to be a beautiful parent and a parent that is empathetic of not only himself, but his children.
Yeah, I think one of the things, and I'm glad, I'm sitting looking at George, and George is taking this all in because he knew in the game, right? So he But I think that's important. You're not going to be a perfect father, right? And here's what I would say makes you a stronger person. And you alluded to it, Mike. And I've had to do this with my kids. There was a point, because look, when you're in a marriage, let me just say, I don't know who had perfect marriage, but when you're in a marriage, there's gonna be some arguments, and there's times when your emotion, you would want to tone your voice down because the kids are in the other room and don't always work that way, and and the marks of the good human being father is when you can do that, and I've had to do that, and go back and tell my kid, hey, listen, I'm sorry, that wasn't me at my best. And it's gonna happen. But I want to let you know so that you don't think this is what it's supposed to be, as you said, right? And it blew. I got to give you a story because you all are on your way to this part, because I like this. So there's 3 phases of fatherhood here, right? Man, a couple years ago, me and my daughter got into a blow up, straight up argument. I mean, it was bad. And it was bad. Now, I won't go into why we had an argument, because then she'd probably kill me. But it was bad. And what made it really bad on my part, and here's what y'all gotta look forward to. I saw me arguing with myself. Like, I saw me. And in that moment, I was like, yo, I got angry. I was like, yo, this chick is like me. And she's trying to argue me like me. And I got like real belligerent, like, nah, you're not gonna out me.
Right.
I mean, but even in those moments, come, but here's what I think, and I said this yesterday on IG, George. Here's what these moments are. Yeah, that happened. We've never really had an art like that at all. That was the first time we ever had an argument.
Yeah.
But the memories of all the beautiful investments in my children far outweigh those tense moments or contentious moments. And you're gonna be heated in the moment. And those are moments, George, where you feel like, we feel like, oh my God. Afterwards, it's that guilt, like, oh my God, I can't believe I had this argument. I thought, oh my God, this is terrible. And even is when they're children, no, that's part of parenting. It's the learning, it's the growing.
Yeah.
It's not going to be devoid of moments that necessitate learning, right? And require learning.
You just nailed it on the head. I think we all have expectations of being a parent as being the one who imparts wisdom on your children. When in fact, your children can impart wisdom on you, again, because of where they are naturally.
Yes.
My son has cried and broke down and said things to me, and I've been like, wow.
Yeah.
He is very emotionally intelligent, and he's comfortable to express that.
Yeah.
I need to be the same way.
Yeah.
Not only with him, but with my wife. I need to be the same way.
Yeah.
I need to be able to express myself, and then, and be as kind of emotionally sensitive or intelligent as he is.
Mm-hmm.
And my daughter is showing signs of a similar emotional intelligence at the age of 3. And, going on 4. And all I could think of is, wow, this is so beautiful.
Yeah.
This is so beautiful, because without children, I'm not going to get this.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to get this. So with children, I'm able to see, like you said, I'm able to see me. I can see me in my kids, right? My father had a temper. I had a temper.
Mm-hmm.
I see his temper in my son or in my daughter, and I'm like, woo, I know exactly where that's coming from.
Right.
I gotta handle it. I gotta handle it a little bit different.
Yeah.
Because times have changed. I gotta handle it a little bit different.
Hey.
And I also gotta let him know, this isn't your fault.
Yeah.
This is your genes.
Yeah.
You got it naturally, brother. You got it naturally.
Hey, that's that's when your wife come. We and my daughter had an argument time. Hours had passed. Me and my wife in the bedroom, we watching TV. She looked at me and said, well, where do you think she got that from? He's like, ooh. He's like,
Yo,
ooh.
right.
Yeah.
And you got to take that. You got to take full responsibility for that. And again, make sure. I think it's beautiful because I think, and now I can now impart some wisdom on you to help you steer that passion, that anger, that temper, whatever, in the right direction. Yeah. Find ways to help yourself, like to make this temper subside a little bit. Think about what you need to do, because that's how I had to learn how to do it. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like oh man.
Look, I'm gonna ask you. You raised some. You gave a slight analogy, Mike, but I'm gonna pose this to a question for both of you all. You talked about, if you grew up with a parent who's a racist and a bigot and you don't see eye to eye. But let me flip that. We are all 3 Black men in a very precarious moment, right? When we have seen, for some the younger generation, they see George Floyd, they see, Rayshard Brooks, they see Mike Brown, Tamir Rice. For us, we remember, Rodney King and others, and you all are on the West Coast and you've seen the protests. How, if and when, because this is for you, George, a when and if, but as Black men looking at how Black bodies, Black and brown bodies are dehumanized in this culture, and in particular how Black men are dehumanized in this culture, what does that do? Seeing these images, knowing these harsh realities, how does that now shape you again? Like, what will that conversation be? How does it now cause you? Because I know for me, I said my children were teenagers years ago, but I remember having those conversations with my son, especially around conversations of when he started driving. If you ever get pulled over by the police, here's what you do. Here's what you don't do. I remember one time he got pulled over. He was young, speeding, and the police officer, when you show up, and when he gave him 2 tickets, and the police officer, he showed up to court when they had to go to the traffic court, and the police officer mentioned, and I was angry. This is a proud moment, was an angry moment, because the police officer mentions in that moment how there it is.
I have that before too. I love that.
Floyd in it? What's that? Cake for Floyd in it? Yes, after. Yes, after. Cake right now? After dinner. Let's do it after. Okay? Close the door, sweetie. Thank you.
I love it.
Yeah. Yes, thank you.
I love that's a great response. Not no.
We had that plan, by the way. We would say that.
I mean, listen, man, and this is the other thing. There was a time when I would have felt like this is ridiculous. This is an intrusion of my privacy. Come on, man.
You have no privacy. You got little children. That's gone.
We got little children. It's like, look, I do the best I can.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's like, and I'd rather spend time with her most of the time.
There you go.
You know what I mean? Like, I'm like,
yeah. Like I would no. Those are like, even now I know, George, the idea of your daughter like just sleeping on your chest, right? That's like the best feeling in the world. That's heaven right there, bro. That's.
And even the things that have changed for me immediately, like I was telling to Michael before, I'm a lot of people call me a germaphobe. Like, I don't drink after people. I don't want you eating off my plate. Like, those kind of things freak me out. I was holding my daughter up the other day, and she just hauled off and just spit up completely in my mouth. I mean, my mouth was of whatever had come out of her body, and I was like, "That's so cute." Who is this guy? Who is this guy? Like, just unbelievable.
Those moments are the moments. I was saying, with my son, this moment was a proud moment, was an angry moment.
Yeah.
In the courtroom, in the court, the police, the officer actually advocated for my son's fine, or advocated for him not to really be penalized. He said because, he was just so well mannered.
Come on.
Now, on one level, he was like, well, I did raise my son.
Yeah.
Be that way. But the other guy was like, bro, so what you expect? Like you like
Another
that angered me. I was proud, but I was angry at the same time. So I mean, these are some realities we have to navigate as Black men. You know, how has this moment again of kind of racial unrest, how has it caused you to reflect and even to start thinking about certain conversations you'll have? Go ahead, George.
Yeah, without a doubt. You know, I remember when I got my license, one of the first conversations I had with my dad was behind, you know, the Richard Pryor bit where he talks about brothers are saying, I'm reaching into my pocket for my wallet, you know? And it was like kind of funny, kind of anecdotal at the time, even though there had been instances of police brutality ending up in brothers dying. But in the fact that, you know, what's that, 30 years ago or so, how that's escalated, how different that is, I'm just thinking about what is my conversation going to be with my daughter, or should I have a son, or my future children? And one of the things, you know, that I think about is something that I wouldn't have thought about before now. And to be honest, that's just come home, you know, like it means that you have to be well-mannered, know your rights. But if it means that you have to, you know, be perhaps more emasculated than you want to be, know your rights. But like, make sure you come home, because anything that happens after that, I know we can deal with. And like, you know, it's only been 5.5 months. I can't imagine my life without that little girl. Yeah. And for her to be in a situation where pride or something else would take place, or even her, you know, her furiousness at a situation would take her away from me, I just can't find it. I can't make sense of that. And I think that my conversation is completely changed in that way. You know, that's on one shoulder. On the other shoulder is, hey, you know what you can do is far beyond what has been done in the generations before you. I was having a conversation with my father-in-law the other day, around the time that George Floyd's murder was everywhere. And we were pissed. We were upset, and we were saying, you know, there's no progress. This is ridiculous. Really looking for immediate solutions. And he halted us. He said, now there has been some progress. And to see it through his lens changed things for me. Like the idea that at the time, that same day, 4 white officers were fired, that wasn't happening when he was my age. Now, it was frustrating because there was more that I wanted to happen. But much like this conversation, we're at 3 different stages of fatherhood, 3 different ages. Having continued conversations like that help you to sort of Venn diagram or compare what your perspective is to the perspectives of the generations, you know, before you. And I think now, you know, as a parent, my main thing is not only to come home myself, wherein, you know, I can't say I would necessarily fight police, but I could see situations where I would say things that I might not say now as a father completely. But now as a parent, I can think about the kind of advice that I want to give my child. It's just different than it would have been 5 months ago. You know, I can't imagine her growing up without me. And I certainly can't imagine continuing the journey without her.
Yeah.
The conversation shifts, yes, because it's, you know, it's in our faces all the time, and we feel like there's more agency, and there are more things that we can do. You know, we've done the conversations about the census and actually pushing paper to get policies and legislation pushed forward that have impact. There are protests, there are continued processes. But at the end of all that, despite what I want to do for everybody and what I would want my daughter to do for the rest of the world, I just really have to have her come home, and I got to come home to her. And that's the basis of my actions.
Yeah, Mike, I know we've had brief conversations, but I'd love to hear your take on this moment, what it means for you as a father, son, the young son. What does this mean for you?
You know, I think there's no conversation without context. And I think it starts before you have the talk with your kid regarding, you know, regarding encounters with the police. I think it's very important to educate them on the history of their people correctly first. So I've had this, I don't know if we talked about this or not, but I've had this conversation with others where, you know, I think the way that I was taught about Black people was through public school system in Maryland. And it was far from enlightening. It was a very passive education. and it was rooted in what I now look back on as the most safe and white supremacist version of an education, which is nonviolence. Be nonviolent. Be nonviolent. And you now know in hindsight that was a way, that was more of a indoctrination rather than an education. So, for me, it's about teaching him what life started out as. Life started in Africa. People were kings and queens in Africa. Let's start there. So by the time we get to slavery, you understand slavery as an injustice, not a beginning.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You understand slavery was an injustice because these people from which I come from which you come from, they were living like kings and queens. They were building pyramids. They were, designing bridges. They were engineers and scientists and everything else. And then this happened. And they were stripped of their language, their culture, their religion. They were stripped of all of that, brought here in chains and used for free labor. So that way he's able to see and process this whole thing with context. Then I think you can have, once he understands that, and then he starts to, then you can get into the civil rights, you can get a Jim Crow and civil rights movement and how we have fought to get here and the contributions that various people have made. Not just the ones that they're going to teach you about in high school or in elementary school or public school. So you have to diversify their education in order to really have, to me, an intelligent conversation about policing in this country.
Mm-hmm.
Because oftentimes people talk about policing in this country without acknowledging that policing in this country started from the slave patrol.
Mm-hmm.
So instantly, the institution of policing is wrong.
Connected to slavery, yeah.
It's connected to slavery. Thusly, it is wrong. It is traitorous. It is a transgression against a whole entire group of people in this country. And so if that's the origin of the police department, then yes, in fact, the police department's foundation is wrong and rooted in all the wrong things. So we now have to change that. And now we're just now getting to that point in 2020. We're just now getting to that point in 2020.
Yeah.
When Will Smith said racism has been around, it's just getting filled.
Yep.
That was so succinct and profound because, like you just said, like your uncle, was it your uncle, George? You said your uncle told? Yeah, it's like things are better because they're being filmed and people are protesting for accountability now. But there was a time when, we have to ask ourselves, why are people protesting now?
Mm-hmm.
Where were the protests for Tamir Rice?
Come on.
I'm talking about the national and global protests. I'm not talking about the local.
Or Breonna Taylor.
Or Breonna Taylor.
Or Trayvon, or Philando Castile.
George Floyd is a horrific act and it is horrible. But the global outrage, wasn't there for Rodney King. So why are we just now getting there now? That's a deeper question. But my point is, in terms of explaining to your kids now, I feel like you got to start with the context of where we came from first. Educate them on who we are as a people, and then ultimately, then you can have a conversation about policing and tie policing to the slave patrol, so that they understand that not all police are good, because the organization itself has roots in a horrendous foundation.
Yeah.
So the goal is to not turn your children against the police. The goal is to educate them about what they need to know when they come in contact with them. One, you can teach them their rights. That's a damn good start. Teach them their rights and teach them not to, if you know your rights, you don't need to shout them. Mm-hmm. Do you understand what I'm saying? You can articulate yourself in a way in which is calm and well-mannered and easy. And if this person decides to escalate it because they think you're being uppity, well, that's why you have a phone. Mm-hmm. Now you have to record, like every time you get stuck. Like, I mean, I didn't have a phone to record my encounters with the police. And I didn't have the talk with my parents until it was too late. Y'all saw Boys in the Hood, right? Mm-hmm. I didn't grow up in the hood, but that moment when Trey comes home, he doesn't come home. He goes to Nia Long's house.
Oh, yeah.
And he comes in and he starts shadow boxing and stuff like that. My Trey moment was coming home, walking into my parents' bedroom and telling them, the police may call you, and here's why. And then having that, and everything is Hollywood related, right? Having that kind of Will Smith moment where he was left in the living room wondering why his father didn't want to be with him. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I had a moment with my parents where I was like, I don't understand why we were treated this way. Because I was with 4 of my friends and we were treated and humiliated in front of our entire class. Mm-hmm. So, you know, to be treated, I didn't understand it. I didn't know. I did not understand why this was happening because I was raised to think that police were heroes. You see it in movies, you see it on television shows. You know what I mean? There's nothing nuanced about policing in Hollywood sometimes. You know what I mean? Like, especially the Hollywood that I grew up watching. It was good versus evil. And you're watching an episode of Law and Order, and you're taught, you are trained to believe that this brother who's been brought in for an interrogation is somehow intellectually inferior and has to be doing something wrong. Definitely. Because the police said he was. Mm-hmm.
I think you framed
a long way to go.
I think you both
framed a long way to go.
I think one, George, you acknowledge the conversation with your father-in-law where there has been progress, but at the same time, Mike, there's work we have to do. We have to contextualize the insanity, right? We have to give a historical context to it. And that's what I did. I think about when my son was young, teenager, putting certain books in his hand, having conversations, telling him to look this up, making him read certain things. I had to put in the context so he understand what was going on and what is part of our history and our legacy and our lineage at the same time. And I think, you know, you talk about why now, one of the things I was saying is that we're in a moment where the cultural distractions are on pause.
Yep.
All the cultural distractions on pause. Sports is on pause, right? Even the basic of going to the bar is on pause, or going to the restaurant on. Everything is on. Going to the movies is on pause. Everything's on pause, and so now we're able to center in. And when I know that's the issue, that many people, especially within white communities, are completely distracted and distanced from the Black reality, because now you have so many whites saying, "Oh, I didn't know it was this bad." Well, it's been this bad for 400 years. But the distractions were at play, so we never really focused on the brutality and the insanity of white supremacy and the myth of racial superiority. I mean, those realities.
But I don't, you know, my problem with that, I didn't know it was this bad logic.
Yeah.
It is, I just disagree with that. I can't swallow that pill.
It's hard to accept.
How did you not, and here's my philosophy on that. You chose to ignore the uprisings that happened before.
Oh, there we go.
You chose to ignore the uprisings that happened in the civil rights movement, the uprisings that happened with OJ and Rodney King and everything. You chose to ignore those uprisings. Yeah. Because this has been going on.
Yes.
It has been going on for a long time. And if you just simply look at riots, and just Google riots, Watts, Detroit. Just keep Google Chicago. Just Google riots.
Yeah.
And you will see that this has been going on for a long time. And the difference is you don't have your schedule to escape to.
Absolutely.
And the other difference is, and nobody has really spoken about this, is that for the first time, it seems that the looters and the rioters did not destroy our neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
They took their protest to the mainstream neighborhoods. Because I've ridden around LA and seen Black Lives Matter spray painted on boarded up buildings.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I see Black Lives Matters on signs now on houses in predominantly white neighborhoods. And whether it's out of fear or understanding, it's still happening now. Why now? Because everyone is involved now.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone has to be involved because it's going to affect everyone. These cops did not discriminate who they beat up during these protests. They did not discriminate at all.
From the old white man in Buffalo got knocked to the ground and head
to the ground. Yep.
When you start seeing white women get knocked down, you know.
Oh yeah,
this is
it's a big issue, man.
This is a real issue, and everybody has to be involved.
Yeah. And I think, and this is, you know, we can have a conversation about that. I mean, for sure, because that's here's what I want to do, because I want to be true to our time. And one, we've covered so much stuff from our experiences, parenting, children, even now coming home full circle with racial justice. I want us to close on this note. And I don't want to necessarily, so I'm gonna ask you a different question, George. You're the new Jack on the block, right? So you know, give me 3 things, and I ask you all different questions. Give me 3 things that since your daughter has been born, you've discovered you need to be. Because there are other men out there who are new dads and those who are going to be new dads who, and you're in that role now. Tell me 3 things you've discovered along this new 5.5-month journey that you need to be. 3 things.
3 things. The first thing that I know is I need to be a much bolder and much more articulate advocate for women, specifically Black women. I need to be waving the Black woman's flag even more than I wave any other flag. Black women are our leaders. They continue to stand in front of us in all kinds of political arenas, personal arenas, social arenas. They hold our families together. And I'm raising a Black woman. And so I know that in order, like I said before, for her to feel as though this advocacy is genuine and authentic, she needs to see me as an advocate for her mother. She needs to see me as an advocate for her grandmothers. She needs to see me as an advocate for all of her friends and the whole of the Black woman community. I think the other thing that I need to do is be a better listener. And that kind of goes hand in hand with that advocacy. I think as men, as we talked about before, we tend to be solutions oriented. And to speak over others in conversation because we have the answer. We tend to sort of try to lead in that way. And I think that in order to be more directed and more effective, I need to listen way more. Even in this conversation, you know, there were certain things that I had an opinion on. And as you all were talking, I was like, you know what? They've both been fathers longer than I have. Let me sit back and take this in. So I would say those 2 first. The last thing, I think I need to be just a little bit more vulnerable than I've been in the past. Thinking about some of the spaces that you guys inhabited and experienced with your fathers where they said, I'm sorry. I think that's kind of twofold, right? Because one, it's important to recognize the humanity there and to really be appreciative of your parents saying, I'm sorry. But also, as much as that feels good, that also teaches your child that it is okay to continually evaluate yourself. And for forgiveness, that it is okay to trust somebody enough to open up your heart and say to them, I'm sorry, will you forgive me? So I think the combination of those 3 things, being a feminist, an advocate for Black women specifically, being way more vulnerable, and being a better listener are the three ways in which I will try to really build a stronger foundation as a father. And all the other things that I don't want to lose, I think will come along if they're massaged by those.
Well, I wish somebody would have told me that when I started as a father, to advocate for women, be a better listener, and be more vulnerable. Bro, that's powerful. What are three things, now that you're in the game, Mike, three things you would share to fathers who are on this journey early, but also for those who've been here? What are some three things that you've learned that you would share?
I mean, I think what has worked for me so far, what I've learned so far is, because honestly, having a daughter was, it was like a Mike Tyson left hook. And it was like, whoa, this is different.
Yes.
This is different. And it actually has helped me. It's funny you say advocate for women more, especially Black women, because I think I felt like I always did, right? And I think it intensifies when you have your own, right? You have your own Black woman that you like, yeah, I need to, now, it's like, yeah. You know what I mean? So I think that has definitely been on my mind, like incessantly, is what can I do to make the world better for her? And it starts with me, right? So yes, I as I said early in this conversation, learning to be more empathetic, learning to be more vulnerable, learning to say, I'm sorry. These are things that I just didn't have growing up. And I have learned, through both my son and my daughter, that they are two different people. And you can't approach them with the same level of parenting. They're different ages and they're different genders and they have different needs. And so that's something I've learned, is that I have to switch gears. I have to switch gears when I'm talking to my son, and switch gears when I'm talking to my daughter. And now switch gears when I'm talking to my wife, because everybody requires a different part of me. And so I have to be able to give them what they need when they need it. Another thing is, I have learned that, again, with my daughter, some of the things that I did not understand about women, from dating them to having a sister to having a mother, we all have been in that situation where we're like, I just don't understand. Like, why do y'all do this? Why do y'all do this? And having a daughter, you see, it's not like whoever you think is off. It's the species, right? And it's not that they're off. It's you don't understand. You don't understand. And having a daughter has helped me understand my wife better. It's helped me understand my sister better. It's helped me understand my mother who has passed. It's helped me understand her even better, because I see where it starts from. And I've learned that I can't apply the same, like I said, the same parenting skills with her that I do with my son, or that I do with my, not parenting skills with my wife, but, just a relationship is different.
Yeah.
Lastly, I would say that having children has probably made me much more politically active.
Yeah.
I can't say that I cared as much about climate change until I had kids and realized, and actually read up on it and realized the world that we're leaving them.
Yes.
And how they didn't ask for that.
Yeah.
I think, I've always voted, but I'll be the first to say I wasn't as concerned with the local elections as I was with the national and federal. I just wasn't. And now I know better. Now I know better that the local elections matter in a lot of ways, and local elections are going to shape how my kids are being treated in whatever city they live in.
Yeah.
So I have to be involved. You know, it's like, I think when your kids get to school, you learn, okay, well, I need to know what's going on at this school. I need to, talk to the teachers and make sure that, y'all not brainwashing my kid, whatever it is. So it was very important for me to be involved in his school and in my daughter's school, because it's the same thing as being politically active. If you're not present at your daughter's school, then you are in turn counting on the teachers and the administrators to raise your children.
Right.
And there are too many of us, not just I'm talking about parents in general, who want to send our kid to the best schools so that we can do less.
Mm-hmm.
When in fact, no matter what school your kid goes to, you need to do more.
Yeah.
And if you look at the education you were given and you see all the flaws and the holes and the indoctrination that was there versus an education, you will say to yourself, I need to be involved. I need to be involved. I need to get on the board. That's how politically active I need to be. I need to not only be politically active in my city and my community, I need to be politically active in my children's schools. And that's kind of where I am right now with 7 and 3, is how can I be more involved, more engaged in their schools so as to not be complacent in allowing other people to indoctrinate my kids.
Yeah. I will drop this. I didn't plan on it, but hearing you all say jarred me. I think now, as the father of 2 grown adults, I think my role now, I've become like their resident sage, right? So now it's, Dad, what do you think about this? Or Dad, what do you think about this? Or how should I handle this? And there are those moments where they call for advice that takes me back to when they were younger. So it gives me an opportunity to reflect back when I was doing more hands-on parenting. But now I become like that sage. I become the advice giver. I become the one that they come to when their things trouble them in a different way than when they were children. Because when they're children, they wanted solutions. Now they just want to hear what I think. So I think that all these stages that we go, I mean, when the kids, as you're and George moving to the 3 and 7-year-old, and then Mike, as you're moving to the teenage years, which I'm gonna pray for you now, bro, because them teenage years, I don't know what happens, but something we all went through. We were teenagers, right?
Yeah.
And then as adults. So I think we learn to parent, and we always parent. We are always parents until the day we leave this place. We just parent differently along the way. But the things you shared, I'm most appreciative of. George learning how to advocate for women, learning to be a better listener, learning to be vulnerable, goes along with what Mike, you said about vulnerability, empathy, learning how to become more understanding of others because of seeing your children and learning how to become understanding. And lastly, here's the most important, one of the most powerful things, thinking more about the world you leave behind for your child, right? Those are things you don't think about until you think about the children who run around the house, the child you're carrying in your arms, George. And you're now thinking about what world, not that I'm just creating for them, but what world am I leaving for them? And how will I participate in this world so that I make sure that my children are better than I am? And
you got to make sure that your kids become engaged in their own communities.
That's right.
And the only way they're going to learn that is to see you do it.
See you do it.
And the other thing that I forgot to mention, I guess this is 4 for me, is because you just brought this up, your kids come to you as a sage. I think it's also very important when your kids ask you something to not just give them the answer.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
To try and listen to them and say, well, what do you think it means?
Yes.
Yeah.
Start with that, because I think oftentimes we just want to be like, yeah, well, it's a place in Germany that, you know, the Olympics happen there. You know what I'm saying? Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But what you can do for them is teach them to fish rather than give them, you know, all the answers.
Yeah.
Teach them to find the answers, you know, but listen to them. Yeah, listen to them. Ask them what they think. Let them feel engaged in what you're doing in your house, in that community. Make them feel a part of that, so that, you know, when they leave the house and go to school, they understand that this is a different community that I need to be engaged in.
Yeah. Listen, George, Michael, I can't thank enough. You all have been extremely supportive of the work of FCBC and of myself. And so I'm grateful for the two of you, man. And like I said in the beginning, letting people just eavesdrop on conversation. And I'm thankful because I know, just looking at some of the comments on Facebook, many people enjoyed this conversation and were fed by it. And one person said something that I really value. They said, it is good to see Black men publicly have conversations about issues that render us vulnerable, right? Right. So that to me is part of why tonight was a blessing, to have these conversations. And tonight just had me about fatherhood, but they can be about a lot of different things. So again, brothers, I love y'all, man. I'm grateful for you all. And I thank you all for being part of tonight's conversation. And I can't thank you enough, because you took time out to spend with us tonight. And so many people are better for it. And so I want to close tonight with a prayer, and then we can wrap it up. So let's pray. God, we thank you for this evening. We thank you for this opportunity. And most of all, oh God, we are grateful for this time of just conversation, of transparency, of vulnerability, of opening up and sharing. We ask, oh God, that you would continue to pour into us as we are fathers, as men, as husbands, oh God, as leaders in our homes. God, help us to continue to be strong nurturers and caregivers, but most of all, oh God, to lead with love, to live by love, and to nurture in loving ways that form a strong foundation in our children. God, we just thank you for the opportunity to listen and grow on tonight. We love you, Lord. And it's in your name we pray. Amen. Hey, brothers. Thank you, man. Love y'all, man. And again, till next time, man, peace and blessings. And my best to your families, to your children, to your wives. And I pray everyone is well, man.
George, we got to connect while you're here, brother.
Yeah, definitely, man.
I'm going to link y'all up after this.
Up.
I got a list of questions already.
All right, y'all. Peace, man.
Peace. God bless.
Peace.